The storm had left the forest heavy with silence, every branch drooping under white weight. His boots sank deep with each step, the cold biting through leather, the air sharp in his lungs. The sound had drawn him here, the cry, high-pitched and raw. And now he saw why. A wolf cub. It couldn't have been more than a few months old, its fur puffed with winter fluff, eyes round with terror. The trap had clamped down on its tiny paw, metal teeth buried cruelly into flesh. Blood dotted the snow like red petals on white cloth. The cub whimpered, too weak to fight, every shiver a plea. For a long moment he stood frozen. Because the cub wasn't alone. The forest shadows moved. Amber glints flickered through the tree-line. Shapes slipped between trunks, silent but heavy. The pack. A dozen wolves, their bodies lean and strong, fur frosted with snow, their eyes burning into him. The air hummed with their growls, low, steady, waiting. His heart thundered in his chest. The choice lay before him, stark as the cold. If he touched the cub, they might take it as an attack. If he turned away, the cub would bleed out in the snow. The cub whimpered again, its gaze locking with his. Innocent, helpless, begging. He crouched. The growls deepened. Slowly, he raised his hands, palms open, showing he carried no weapon. He eased closer, boots crunching in the snow. Every step was met with the pack's shifting, muscles rippling, heads lowering, jaws parting to reveal sharp white teeth. Easy, he whispered, though the storm swallowed his words. The trap was old, rusted, stiff. He pressed his gloved fingers into the hinge, straining. The steel bit his skin even through leather. His breath came ragged as the cub flinched, yelping in pain. The alpha moved then. Massive, scarred, his body thick with winter muscle. He stepped forward from the shadows, steam rising from his muzzle. His growl rumbled through the ground itself, vibrating in the man's bones. The man froze, his pulse hammering. The alpha's amber gaze bore into him, cold and unblinking. But the cub whined louder, thrashing weakly. The man gritted his teeth, turned his attention back to the trap, and pushed harder. Metal shrieked against metal, a grinding scream that cut through the forest. The hinge gave. Just barely. The jaws loosened. With a pitiful cry, the cub yanked its paw free, stumbling into the snow. It collapsed, trembling, before staggering toward the tree-line. The pack parted to let it through. The silver she-wolf, the mother, he realized, nudged it gently, licking its wound, her growls softening. Silence fell. The man stayed kneeling in the snow, breath sharp in the freezing air, his hands shaking. He had freed the cub. And now, he waited. The wolves circled him, their eyes unblinking, their bodies tense. No longer growling, no longer advancing, just watching. He could feel it in their gaze. This wasn't over. They had seen what he had done. And they would never forget. The snow drifted quieter now, a soft curtain falling between the trees, but the silence in the clearing was heavier than steel. The man stayed kneeling, breath steaming, every muscle rigid. The cub had vanished into the safety of its mother's fur. Yet the pack did not retreat. They closed in. Not in a rush, not with snapping jaws, but with slow, deliberate steps. Paws pressed into the snow with eerie precision, circling him. Their eyes glowed faintly in the pale dawn, dozens of amber lights cutting through the white haze. It felt like a courtroom. And he was on trial. The silver she-wolf licked her cub's paw, her ears twitching, gaze flicking back to him. Her growl was softer now, uncertain. But the alpha, scarred, massive, carved of muscle and frost, stood tall at the front of the circle, his head high, his tail rigid. The alpha's growl wasn't just a sound. It was a verdict waiting to be spoken. The man forced himself to lower his head, his eyes dropping to the snow. Not submission out of fear, but respect. He knew enough of animals to understand postures, the language of body rather than words. This was their land, their trial, their right. The alpha stepped forward, each stride heavy, snow crunching beneath his weight. The air between them crackled with tension. The wolf stopped just feet away, muzzle steaming in the cold, amber eyes drilling into him. His lips peeled back slightly, exposing fangs long and sharp, gleaming with frost. The man didn't move. His heartbeat roared in his ears, but he kept his hands open, palms facing outward, empty. The alpha sniffed once, twice, his hot breath hitting the man's face. He flinched, only slightly, but held his ground. For a long moment, the forest held its breath. Then, the growl stopped. The alpha's ears flicked. He circled slowly around the man, tail brushing the air like a judge pacing the floor. The other wolves mirrored him, their paws pressing tracks into a perfect ring. It wasn't random. It was ritual. The man understood. This was their way of deciding whether he had acted against them, or alongside them. The cub whimpered again, curling against its mother. That small sound broke the tension. Several wolves' ears twitched, and the silver she-wolf turned her head toward the man once more. She didn't bare her teeth. She didn't snarl. She simply looked. Something unspoken passed between them. A mother's recognition. The alpha stopped circling. He stood directly in front of the man again, his eyes fierce and burning. For one long second, the man thought it was over, that the trial had ended in blood. But instead, the alpha raised his muzzle skyward and howled. The sound ripped through the forest, long and commanding, vibrating through the trees, echoing off distant cliffs. It was not the howl of a kill. It was the howl of acknowledgement. One by one, the others joined. Their voices layered together, a chorus that filled the sky. The air thrummed with their song, wild and eternal. The man sat frozen, the sound flooding into his chest, rattling his bones. He realized then, this was not his end. This was his mark. The pack had seen. They had judged. And though they would not welcome him as one of their own, they would never forget. The alpha lowered his head at last, his breath heavy in the still air. He gave a single huff, sharp and final, before turning back toward the tree-line. The pack followed, silent shadows melting between the trees. The silver she-wolf guided her cub close, her tail brushing its flank protectively. Within moments they were gone. Only paw prints remained in the snow. The man stayed kneeling for a long time, staring at the place where they had vanished. His heart pounded, his body shook, but his mind was steady. He knew. He hadn't just saved a cub. He had been tested, judged, and spared. But something deeper lingered in that chorus of howls, something he couldn't shake. This wasn't mercy. This was memory. And memory, in the wild, lasted forever. The clearing was empty now, the snow settling over paw prints like nature itself was trying to erase what had just happened. The man rose slowly, his knees stiff, his breath still ragged. He scanned the tree-line again, but the pack was gone. Not a sound. Not a shadow. It should have been relief. But it wasn't. He turned toward the trail, heading back the way he had come. The storm had thinned to flurries, the sky pale gray, but the forest was still suffocatingly quiet. His boots crunched in rhythm, each step dragging, exhaustion weighing on him. Yet no matter how far he walked, the feeling lingered. He wasn't alone. At first he brushed it off, just nerves, just the echo of what he'd faced. But then, at a bend in the trail, he caught it. Movement. A flicker of gray fur between the trees. He froze, heart thundering. His eyes scanned the ridge above him. For a moment, nothing. Then, faintly, the glow of amber eyes. One wolf. Then two. Then more. They were spread wide, not close enough to strike, but close enough to follow. Shadows drifting in and out of the tree-line, every step in sync with his. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to keep moving. The pack wasn't gone. They had chosen to follow. But why? The trail grew steeper, the snow deeper. His breath came in sharp clouds as he pressed forward. Once, his boots slipped on hidden ice, sending him sprawling into the snow. The sting shot up his ribs. He cursed, pulling himself upright. That's when he heard it. A growl. Not from the wolves. From somewhere else. His head snapped toward the sound. At the edge of the trees, barely visible, crouched a lone coyote. Its yellow eyes locked on him, its ribs sharp with hunger. The man stiffened. His hand went instinctively to the knife at his belt. But before he could move, another sound split the air. A deeper growl. He turned just in time to see two wolves step from the ridge, their bodies low and tense, ears flat, eyes burning. The coyote froze, tail twitching nervously. Then, with a sharp yelp, it turned and bolted into the trees. The wolves didn't chase. They simply turned their gaze back to the man. Silent. Watching. His stomach twisted. They weren't hunting him. They had just protected him. The realization gnawed at him as he trudged further down the trail. His mind spun with questions. Wolves did not guard men. Wolves did not trail them for miles without reason. And yet, every time he glanced back, the shapes were there. Not near, not aggressive, just present. He reached the frozen creek, ice glittering faintly under the gray sky. Carefully, he stepped across. Midway through, the crust gave way, plunging one boot into freezing water. The shock tore a cry from his throat as he scrambled to the far bank, yanking his foot free. Shivering, he glanced up. And saw them again. 3 wolves stood on the opposite ridge, their heads high, their bodies steady. They hadn't flinched at the splash. They hadn't turned away. They were waiting. Waiting for him. By the time the roof of his cabin appeared through the trees, his legs felt like stone. Relief should have rushed him, but instead, a strange heaviness filled his chest. Because he knew, before he even turned to look, that they were still there. He faced the ridge. The alpha stood tall against the pale sky, breath rising in steady clouds. The silver she-wolf was at his side, the cub pressed close to her flank. The others fanned out like shadows carved from snow. They didn't advance. They didn't retreat. They just watched. The man raised a hand, uncertain, a gesture of acknowledgement. The alpha's ears twitched. For a long, breathless moment, they locked eyes across the snow. Then the great wolf gave a single, low huff, his breath fogging the dawn. Without another sound, the pack melted back into the forest. The man stood rooted in place, heart thundering, realizing what had just happened. He hadn't been stalked. He hadn't been spared by chance. He had been claimed. Not as prey, but as someone the pack would never forget. The cabin stood quiet in the clearing, its roof heavy with snow, chimney dark. He had never been more relieved to see it. Yet when he stepped inside and dropped the latch behind him, the relief didn't last. Because the silence followed him. He lit the stove, coaxing fire from brittle kindling, warmth slowly seeping into the cabin. His soaked boots steamed beside the flames, the sting of thaw sharp in his toes. But even as heat returned to his body, his mind refused peace. The wolves were out there. He could feel them. Every creak of the cabin walls made him glance toward the window. Every shift in the wind sounded like footsteps. Finally, unable to ignore it, he peeled back the curtain. His breath caught. At the edge of the clearing, half shadowed by snowdrifts, stood 2 wolves. Their shapes were sharp against the pale night, ears forward, bodies still. Not attacking. Not retreating. Simply watching. He let the curtain fall, heart pounding. They hadn't left. The night dragged slow. He dozed by the fire, jerking awake at the smallest noise. Once, he swore he heard soft crunching in the snow. Another time, the low rumble of a distant growl. But nothing came. When dawn finally broke, pale light spilling across the frozen clearing, he stepped outside. The cold bit harder than before, but the sight waiting for him froze him more than the air. Tracks. Dozens of paw prints ringed the cabin. Not chaotic. Not random. A perfect circle pressed into the snow, layered and deliberate. His chest tightened. They hadn't just lingered. They had kept watch. He crouched low, tracing a paw mark with his gloved hand. The prints were fresh, hours old at most. They had patrolled through the night, looping around and around, a living perimeter. Guardians. The realization made his throat ache. Later that day, he ventured out to check his traps along the frozen river. The wind cut sharper there, and the ice groaned underfoot. He felt the prickling sensation again, the undeniable weight of eyes on his back. Turning, he caught sight of them. The silver she-wolf stood across the river, the cub nestled close at her side, its injured paw held just above the snow. She didn't growl. Didn't move. Just stood, gaze locked on him. The man raised a hand instinctively, the same gesture he had given before, open, respectful. This time, something shifted. The silver wolf's tail flicked once. The cub tilted its head, ears twitching. And though she didn't step closer, she didn't turn away either. A fragile thread, but a thread all the same. That evening, as he set snares along the tree-line, another sound cracked through the valley. A howl. Not from the pack. From something else. Coyotes. High-pitched, sharp, hungry. His pulse quickened. Coyotes were bold in numbers, scavengers willing to push their luck. And they were close. He rose quickly, eyes scanning the trees. The calls echoed nearer, circling. His knife felt small in his hand. Then the forest answered. A low, rolling howl surged from the ridge. Deep. Commanding. The alpha. Moments later, a dozen more voices joined, layered, powerful, shaking the very air. Their chorus crashed against the coyote calls like thunder against wind. The challengers fell silent, their cries swallowed. The man waited, heart pounding, as the woods went still. Then he heard it, paws crunching snow above him. He looked up to see shadows crest the ridge. Wolves standing tall, their heads high, eyes sharp. Not circling him. Not judging him. Guarding him. That night, back in the cabin, he sat by the fire in a haze. The truth pressed heavier with each passing moment. He had lived years in solitude, convincing himself that survival meant being alone. That the forest offered no companionship, no loyalty, only teeth and hunger. But now, after one act, one cub, he was no longer alone. The pack had placed him in their circle. He hadn't just rescued a cub. He had been chosen. The days passed, each one colder than the last. He began to grow used to the strange companionship of the pack, always distant, never near, yet never gone. Their eyes glimmered from the ridge at dawn, their howls rolled through the forest at dusk. It was a fragile rhythm, one that ended the moment he found the boot prints. Fresh. Heavy. Human. He crouched low, gloved fingers brushing the indentations in the snow. The stride was long, the tread deep, 3 men at least, armed, moving fast. His chest tightened. These were not hunters looking for food. These were men looking for trophies. And their tracks led straight toward the ridge. Toward the wolves. He followed, cautious, sticking to the shadows of the trees. His worst fears sharpened with every step. Voices echoed through the still forest, carried by the wind. Heard about a big one here. Scarred alpha, worth a fortune. Hide'll fetch double if it's fresh. The man's stomach turned. They weren't after deer. They were after the pack. When he reached the rise, his fears became flesh. 3 figures trudged through the snow below, rifles slung across their backs, eyes scanning the trees. They moved with the arrogance of men who believed nothing could stop them. Until they saw him. Well, look who it is! One sneered, resting his rifle on his shoulder. Cabin man. Another smirked. Bet he knows where they den. The tallest of the 3 stepped forward, face weathered and mean. Show us where the wolves are, old man. Or maybe we'll see if you bleed as red as they do. The man's jaw clenched. He said nothing. But the forest did. A low growl rolled through the trees. The hunters stiffened, spinning toward the sound. Amber eyes blinked into existence all around them, like embers in the snow. Shadows shifted, silent but heavy. 1, 2, 10. More. The pack had come. The alpha stepped from the ridge first, massive and scarred, his breath steaming in the frozen air. The silver she-wolf flanked him, the healed cub at her side. Behind them, a dozen wolves fanned out, bodies tense, teeth glinting. The man exhaled sharply, relief surging through his veins. He wasn't alone. The hunters panicked. One raised his rifle too quickly, fear in his eyes. "Don't!" the man barked, his voice sharp and steady. But the shot rang out anyway. The bullet tore through a branch, snow bursting in a shower of ice. The wolves snarled, their growls erupting like thunder. The alpha lunged. Chaos exploded in the clearing. Wolves surged from every side, circling, snapping, driving the hunters back. Teeth flashed inches from their arms, tails lashed the snow. The hunters stumbled, shouting, their rifles swinging wildly. But the pack moved faster, a wall of muscle and fury. One hunter tripped, crashing into the snow, only to find the silver wolf snarl in his face, her fangs bared. He froze, breast shallow, eyes wide with terror. Another swung his rifle in panic, but the alpha struck, jaws snapping so close that cloth ripped from his coat. The man dropped the weapon, scrambling to his feet. The third spun in circles, eyes darting, realizing there was no escape, not through force, not through firepower. The wolves had them. And then the man stepped forward. "Leave," he said, voice iron in the frozen air. "This forest isn't yours." The hunters stared at him, faces pale, breath ragged. Then, as the pack closed in, they bolted, crashing through the snow, leaving their rifles, their arrogance, and their courage behind. Their shouts faded into the distance until the forest swallowed them whole. Silence fell again. The wolves didn't chase. They stood in formation, eyes fixed on the man. The alpha's chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, his amber gaze steady. The silver she-wolf eased back, the cub nudging close to her leg. The man's throat tightened. He looked around at the circle of wolves, creatures who should have torn him apart weeks ago, yet had stood between him and death not once, but twice. He knew the truth now. This was no accident. He had saved one cub. And in return, the pack had given him something greater: protection, loyalty, a bond carved in the wild itself. The alpha stepped closer, so near the man could see each scar etched across his muzzle. Their eyes met, man and wolf, survivor and guardian. The alpha dipped his head. And for the first time, the man understood. He was no longer just a wanderer in the forest. He was remembered. And he always would be. The hunters' shouts had faded into the distance, swallowed by the forest. Only the crunch of paws in snow and the soft hiss of the wind remained. The man stood in the clearing, chest heaving, his breath rising like smoke. Around him, the wolves held their formation, not threatening, not hostile. Simply present. Their eyes glowed faintly in the pale dawn, waiting. Then, the smallest among them moved. The cub. It limped forward on its mended paw, snow brushing its belly. Every step was shaky, uncertain, but it did not hesitate. The silver she-wolf watched, ears pricked, but did not stop it. The man froze, heart tight in his chest. Slowly, he crouched, lowering himself to the cub's level. His hand extended, bare fingers open to the cold. The cub sniffed once, twice. Then, with a soft whine, it pressed its head into his palm. Warmth surged through him, stronger than any fire. His throat burned, eyes stinging. In that fragile moment, all the fear, all the trials, all the judgment dissolved into something deeper. Acceptance. The alpha stepped forward next. The great wolf stood tall, scars cutting across his muzzle, amber eyes locked on the man. The world seemed to pause, the snow hanging in the air, the silence heavy with meaning. Then the alpha dipped his head. A bow. The sound came after. A howl, low and resonant, shattering the stillness. The kind of sound that carried across valleys, echoing against cliffs, older than words themselves. One by one, the others joined. The silver wolf's song rose high, the younger wolves' voices weaving beneath. The cub's tiny cry added at last, thin but determined. The chorus filled the sky. Not as threat. Not as warning. As oath. The man closed his eyes, the sound wrapping around him, sinking into his bones. He knew what it meant. This was their vow, not to forget, not to forsake. From this day forward, he would not walk the wilderness alone. When the howls faded, silence returned. But it was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of promise. The wolves turned as one, retreating into the trees, their shadows melting into the endless white. The silver wolf lingered a moment longer, her cub pressed close, before following. Only the alpha remained. He looked back once, amber gaze steady, breath curling in the frosty air. Then he, too, vanished into the forest. The man stayed kneeling in the snow, staring at the place where they had gone. His chest rose and fell, his body trembling, but his heart was steady. He had saved one cub. And in return, the wild itself had given him something no man could buy, no words could capture. A pack's loyalty. A bond for life.